Awesome. Well, welcome back, everyone, to the final session. We are very excited to welcome Briane Cornish. Ooh, great. Briane is the director at FinEQUITY.org. She's also the former founder of Enara Health, DCRefers.org, and CleanSlateDC.com, as you can see on the slides. Briane is a lawyer and public interest technologist, and we are really excited to have her here. So please join me in giving her a very warm welcome.
Thank you all so much for being here. I hope you've had a wonderful Saturday. And if you're not from New York City, welcome to New York. I've been living here since I was 15, so it's a city I care a lot about, and I'm glad for you guys to get to experience it, especially tomorrow when you go to the park. So all the best in that. I'm going to talk about a number of things. I'm going to start off with my journey because I think it gives a lot of insight into where I've been, and it might be helpful for questions that you might have that maybe I don't go too deep into, but you want to kind of know later on. Because when I thought about this talk, I really want to focus on kind of like my entrepreneurial journey, my tech journey, but also thinking about the perspective of if you are coming from a tech background, how do you think about yourself in regards to this entrepreneurial journey? How does that work? What role are you going to play? And if you're collaborating with others, again, what role will you play? What do you need to know about that? And so there'll be a lot of heavy tech business kind of launch talk, and on both sides of the spectrum from different types of entities, like launching a nonprofit versus launching a for-profit business. And so I'll be talking about a number of those things. So we'll just get started. And I think if you have like a pressing question, I don't mind you asking it during. We can leave questions afterwards, but since it's such a small group, I guess I'd be totally okay if you were just like, I had a question based on something you just said, as opposed to, I don't want you to forget about it. So let's start with this slide. There is an error on this slide, this whole really lovely sentence about serenity. It was just something I forgot to delete, so ignore that part. I didn't write that. That was like already pre-written text with the slides. But I'll start with my journey after college. So I moved here when I was 15 from the Bay Area, from California. For any Californians in the room, I had majored in like English literature. I was really interested in like public health. The biggest things I was interested in was social inequities. That was kind of my core. And I would jump into like totally different classes, whether it was logic, philosophy, English literature, just different aspects to all get out what I was interested in, which was social inequity. And I was part of so many different student groups, whether it be domestic focused groups or international groups focused on human rights and refugees. I was just kind of that was just kind of what I was already interested in by the time I was in college. And so when I graduated, I didn't know necessarily where to go. So like a number of recent grads, I was like, well, if you care about like, justice and you care about rights, then obviously the next step is law school, which I think was it's a path I went down, but I usually encourage other people to think very much more broadly about that choice, which is that your core values and whatever you want to do can be implemented basically anywhere. It's more so about you and your commitment to it. And it doesn't matter. You don't have to have like a specific degree to do it. It's just, you can find different avenues towards what your goal is. But at the time, my goal was, hey, I'm going to go get into law school. That's my goal, because that's the way I think the world can be. I can change the world. I can, create new laws. And so I had tried to apply to law school, but without any prep. I remember being in like a study hall with a friend, and we were just submitting our applications like the day before it was due, with a bunch of snacks and everything. One of those like all-nighters, which I physically can't do anymore, but I remember doing all-nighters, and this is one of the things we were doing. And so I didn't get into any of the schools I actually liked, so I decided not to go. And at the time, there was a program which still exists, the Americorps Program. If you've heard of, I think there's like this is the one focused on like American support. So this ability for young people to get jobs doing things that might help advance their community. And so Americorps was like a program, like a 2-year program, kind of similar to like a Teach for America, but not focused on teaching, focused on kind of supporting nonprofits. So you'd be matched with like a local nonprofit. And again, I went there because I was focused on like my interests. They were actually running racial justice dialogues. So they would take people of different races together in the community, host dialogues, like a curriculum that they had, to try to get them to really have conversations and come together and collaborate and brainstorm potential solutions that would be something that they want to do with their community. And so that was the reason why I bring that up, is because one, I went there because of the focus, like the topical focus, but the organization that I was put with didn't actually have this program fully designed. So what that meant was that I was going to have to create a program and create things from scratch. And so that really started like my journey of tinkering, which is how you actually go from nothing or just an idea to something. And so without any tech, kind of just focused on like completely non-tech stuff, we ended up designing a program, designing a curriculum, designing pre and post surveys to see, to then measure, right, what was the impact of people who went through the program. All skills that I didn't realize would actually help me later on when I thought about designing products and services and things like that. So I ended up finishing that program and ended up right back where I was, which is like, okay, I'm going to law school. So I ended up going to law school back where I was, which is California. I enrolled at Stanford thinking I was going to become a litigator one day. I wanted to be one of those lawyers who, again, is like creating policy, writing policy, doing all those things. But once I really started to go into all the classes, I found the law extremely limiting. When I wanted to see creativity, when I wanted to see the ability to create new things and try them out, I just didn't see that as something that the law actually appreciates. And that doesn't say that's not true, because there are a lot of innovative lawyers, but law schools in general, they like to teach the traditional stuff. They don't really want to teach you to try new things, because those things are untested and risky. They'd rather teach the things that are, more standard. Somebody has been validating them over decades, and that makes sense. And so what happened at Stanford was that I was never going to law school classes. I was always somewhere else. So I ended up at the business school. I ended up at what they call the design school, for anyone who has like background in something called human-centered design or user-centered design. That was what they were running at the design school. I ended up everywhere other than where I was supposed to be. And this was the most joyous experience for me, because I really got to think about things on multiple levels. And I could be in classes, not only, thinking about things from a legal perspective, because I had that background too. I could think about contracts and policies and rules, but then I could also speak business, and I could also speak design. And that was really helpful for me. And then, of course, because of the area I was in, this was an area that had hackathons every weekend. If you've ever been to a hackathon, if you haven't, I'll always try to give context for anything I mentioned, but a hackathon is basically like some kind of truncated 1 or 2 day or 3 day event, sometimes 2 weeks, where it's really pulling in people who have engineering and design skills to say, start from zero, come up, find a problem, and create a solution in a very truncated amount of time. And they would give prizes. So I remember being at IBM, big tech company in California, and we spent the night at IBM, which was weird, but they let us all stay overnight. And we were doing like a 2-day hackathon, and we had to like use the solution, and whatever we built had to use some like kind of IBM solution, right? Because they were funding it. So we ended up, I was on a team, so I was the only person who wasn't like a designer or a developer, but I ended up being the kind of product, I guess, manager in that role, or the person who was overseeing the project to make sure we got from our designs and our plans to something that we could actually showcase, 48 hours later. And we ended up winning second place. So it was really cool. I forgot what I built. It had something to do with SMS, but I don't remember what it is now. But that was my background. So I was coming out of that, doing that from most of my time there until my last year, when I got really more into entrepreneurial thinking. Hey, I've decided I no longer want to practice law necessarily. I want to launch my own thing. And so I started focusing on the business school, where I was taking classes not only in tech entrepreneurship, but also in social entrepreneurship. which can be, these names are all fuzzy, but, tech entrepreneurship, of course, is just innovation, related to tech. You're building new tech, right? And it's a business, Facebook, tech entrepreneurship. Whereas social entrepreneurship can sometimes involve tech, sometimes it doesn't. But what it's saying is that you are innovating or building a product or service for the specific social impact. So it's not just, Facebook. Some people would say, Facebook is a social enterprise or social entrepreneurship because it's helping people communicate better with each other and it's building relationships. And they usually say that too. I still wouldn't identify them as a social enterprise, but they believe that the value they're creating is more like, tight communities, the ability to keep and remain in contact with the people you love and care about. And so they do have that aspect to them. And I think that the social enterprises, they usually have a very more clear idea of, we do this thing and there's specific measurable outcomes that we can measure to say, because of the thing we built or the service we built, there's a particular positive benefit for a group of people. And we've identified that whole kind of, they call it like inputs and outputs. So you input what you built or your service or your program, and their outputs are something that you can measure. And they call that outcomes as well. So that's whole like businessy talk, but that's kind of like the spectrum of classes I was taking. And they would have classes called like Startup Garage. The idea is that during that semester, you just, you end up starting an entrepreneurial venture by the end of the class, and you could pitch it to the professors and maybe they would introduce you to investors. And so that's how I ended up becoming a co-founder of Enara Health. So at the time I had met a doctor, which is, again, a lot of times when you're looking for a co-founder, it's probably gonna be somebody you meet and get along with, even if they come from a totally different background than you. So I met a doctor. He had been a doctor for several years and then decided to go back to business school. We just got along really well because we were working on that last project. And that's how we understood that we could work well together. We were able to work on a project and it showed, wow, we can actually, we don't have the same opinions. We're not exactly the same, but we can work together. We can get to a particular outcome together. And so his purpose really was to try to, there was a lot of, in the space at the time, there was a lot of innovation on health and tech. People building apps towards, tons of health outcomes, but a big area at the time was also like diabetes treatment, apps that might help people manage their diabetes, apps that might help people who are pre-diabetic, all these things. It was a big area. And there was like a lot of funding as well at this time. And so he had already like always wanted to start that organization. And I came in because I was like, I want to support you. And I also think there's like some, racial health disparities element that I'm really excited about. So I can like help in your journey, not only from like the legal perspective, but also just like as another co-founder, right? Somebody who is doing all the small things you need to do to start a startup. It's better if you have somebody that you trust working with you. So you don't have to bear the brunt of every conversation you have to have or everything you have to build. You're not building it alone. And so we ended up basically founding Enara Health. It was focused on, again, people who had diabetes and how could they manage their diabetes in a way that was like tech enabled. So there was like a tech and mobile app attached to it, and had like, was considered to be like something that could produce actual outcomes that could show like, because of this use, their nutrition habits have changed in like the following ways. And so this one is correct. That was our journey at the time, because we had this idea, had a plan, had a tech plan of like what we were going to build and why, and particular outcomes. And so then we had to go to the question of, and I think we had an engineer at the time. So we have a doctor like who was kind of like business oriented. You have me who's like a lawyer who also like can basically play different like product management roles. And then we had an engineer who was kind of just came on to say, yeah, if you guys build it, you can pay me and I'll be the person building the mobile app. And I think the doctor had known this person before. So that was like the three of us. It was like our little holy trinity. And so we ran into a big issue, which is that we were all so excited about this, but we didn't know where we were going to get the money because the class we had been in, didn't lead to funding. So the question was, where were we going to do this? How are we going to get this money? How are we going to get this off? How are we going to pay this developer to actually build out the app so we could start using it with clients? And so we, at the time, were like, okay, well, let's go the traditional route. We heard that, if you have an idea, you go to VCs with your plan, right? Venture capitalists. You tell them about your idea. You tell them about how much money it's going to generate over time, right? And then maybe how much, what they call equity or stake they could get into it, right? So that they put money in and then they get their money back about 7 times as much, right? That's their goal. So we're like, let's do that. We're ready for that. So we ended up doing like 3 months of going and talking on the doors of a bunch of venture capitalists, saying, here's this amazing idea. We need you to, join this investment. We can potentially offer you this much, stake or equity in the company. Fund us. And we'd never done any, this was our first time doing this. We just like tried it, right? And it was a horrible experience. And there are many reasons why it was horrible, but one was that, they just didn't believe that this market size was big enough for them to get their return. So even though the idea might be great, they said, that's not what we like. We like a market size that's really big so we can get our money back. And that's the goal. And they also, for some reason, weren't excited about me being there because they were like, you don't need lawyers. Lawyers aren't really helpful for starting a company. They usually slow you down because they always are trying to tell you about the laws and watching out for policies you might violate. So some of them have very negative opinions of lawyers as being the ones who are risk averse and slow you down because their lawyers are cautious. They're always like, watch out for this. We can't do this. We might violate this law. Good lawyers know how to make sure that you can manage risk and still move forward, but that's the reputation, right? So they were actually trying to push me off of the actual ownership of the company to make space for themselves. And this is when I realized that I was like, well, I don't actually feel comfortable where this is going. I'm not sure if this is where I'm going to continue my journey. And interestingly enough, my other co-founder was like, well, I don't like what they're asking for. What I'm going to do is I'm going to instead, start to invest do what's called bootstrapping. If you guys go in business, you'll find out more about this. But the idea is that bootstrappers are people that don't go after venture capital. They go and find their money through themselves or friends or family so that they don't have to answer to anybody about their company. They're usually fronting the money themselves, whether it's for loans or through family investments, and that allows them to keep control of the organization and the company. And so he ended up doing that. So that was his decision, but I got to stay on as co-founder. And so now the company has grown and has like 12 employees, maybe 12 to 15 in California. I'm like I left the company probably around that time, but got to stay on and get all the updates and anytime I could give advice, like served as advisor to the company. But it really was helpful because it really gave me the spectrum of if you're creating something valuable and people are saying to you things that they don't want to fund it, that doesn't mean it's the end of the road. There are different avenues to pursue something that you want to pursue, and it's about finding that avenue and the one that fits for you. And he was really passionate about this, so that's why his organization still exists today. He's able to hire multiple developers and multiple staff members to continue to invest in his vision. So I'll move on to my next run of life. So at this point, I left this company. Again, this was like an very early stage company. We were pre-product. They like to say the difference of different companies. This is a pre-product company because we had a pilot product, but it wasn't actually being used. And so then I really was like, okay, I want to pursue my legal career because I'm still a lawyer. So I ended up in DC because I was like, I'm going to do politics stuff. But I was like, I'm going to try to balance this with my passion because I really want to do tech stuff. So I ended up doing a very weird mix where I was working during the day, like doing like legal research and regulatory stuff, really like, tracking legislation, tracking regulation, all this stuff. And during the night, I would invest time in digital communities related to tech and development. So that included a group that some of you guys might be aware of. There's a group called Code for America. They have, in the United States, they have different brigades in different cities. And what they do is they have developers meet with people and community members or organizations that might need tech. And they build that software, but it's also a community. So people can, if you're new to tech, it's a great way to build your skill. If you've never, been a product manager before, it's a great way to volunteer as a product manager and get that experience. And so I ended up becoming a product manager for a product that really related to what I was doing. And that was Clean Slate DC. So what Clean Slate DC was a software that we did fully build out, which was amazing. And it was focused on people who had criminal records in the United States. And the difficulty there was that the laws for how do you, let's say you did something 20 years ago and it's still showing up on your criminal record and you're trying to get a job and that thing you did 20 years ago is still showing up. There's laws around how you ask for that to leave your criminal record, right? And the law is different. Every state and every country, they're all different. And so people really struggle to even understand these laws. They usually have to go find an attorney. And that's why there are so many attorneys, because usually the law is not clear. So we said, well, what if we built software, right? Rules that could understand, basically take the laws, turn them into code, and a person can put in particular things about them and get an output, not only as to when they would be able to maybe take something off their criminal record, but under what conditions and under what timelines. So it took all this complex law, turned it into code and software, and the idea was that just, person could generate for themselves a plan, which is like, okay, in 2 years, I'll be able to take this off my record. Or if on 1 year, this will be able to come off. I can petition for this to come off. And again, it was built by tons of volunteers, but worked perfectly because we could test it with actual lawyers who were doing this. We'd say, hey, you know the law, you're an expert. How about you try to make a decision on this person's case, and we're going to use our software to make a decision on this person's case. And if it comes out the same, then that means our system is accurate, right? And so we did a number of tests like that, and that was really great because it also gave us buy-in, because these lawyers will say, hey, actually, this tool does work. I just saw it with my own eyes. And so that was one of the ways in which we were able to get community organizations excited about it, because they were, of course, not interested in being replaced by software. We said, we're not trying to replace you. We just want to make your job easier. And wouldn't it be nice if this could just save you some time, right? That journey was great because it kind of, again, connects this idea of like how you build, but knowing that people actually approach software very differently. And if any of you all are like, okay, I'm going to build something and people are going to love it, I'm here to tell you that may not be true, but it's okay for you to try it out and try to understand, why don't they love it? Is it because they don't trust the outcome? Is it because they feel like it's, maybe makes them feel like inadequate? Like, hey, I'm so smart, why do I need a software to do this? You don't want them feeling that way because then they're not going to use it. You want to build something where they're like, this actually makes me feel better. This actually makes me feel like I can save time. This makes me feel connected. Those are all the things you want. And so that's why building is such an interesting journey, because it really does have to be modular, right? Of things that might be built and then scrapping that and having to figure out, well, what is actually the thing that people do want from us? We thought it was this. It actually maybe wasn't, or it was this, but it's about how we frame it, right? That makes tech and business and development and just like the startup journey much more difficult, but also really fun it's frustrating, but still very fun. So I was doing that, and we ended up launching that product, and it still exists today. And then I moved, again, I was like, really like, I just want to build. I just want to do things that I care about and like launch as many organizations as I can, because I just want to create good in the world. That was my goal. So at the same time, again, because I'm in the legal field, so I'm just going around and building and creating stuff with people I'm running into, right? People who share things that I like. So you will do the same, where you would enter the spaces that you care about, the places you think you are really passionate about, and interact with people, and that might create an opportunity for something new. So that's a similar thing happened. I was talking with a bunch of lawyers who were saying, hey, what's really a problem? There's all these people who can't even afford us. They make good money, but they can't afford us, and the government won't pay for them because they make too much for government to step in. So it's like maybe they call them middle income people, right? They're like, and there's no way for us to like connect these people with lawyers who would actually take their case. So that's the problem. It wasn't a tech problem to begin with, but it was just a simple problem. So I ended up meeting with some of these attorneys, and I was like, we we can potentially, if you want, we could try some things. We might try a website. We might try, I didn't tell them we might try a software because I think that would have made them run away. But I said, we might try, maybe we just try, let's just start. I'm thinking about what are the different things we could try. Is it an email list? Is it, just connecting people via email, things like that. Like, I was like, let's just start. And we ended up meeting, just continuing to meet and talk. And this journey is really a beautiful one for me because, again, this was with people who were very anti-tech, or at least new things, not anti-tech, but anti-new things. I remember an instance where just for our documentation, I was like, we're going to do everything on Google Drive, so everything's properly saved. We have documentation of all our conversations, anything we said we wanted to do. And they were like, no to Google Drive. No to Google Docs, absolutely no. We don't use that, we don't want to use that. I was like, this is going to make it harder for us as we start to, keep this momentum going and start building things. We need a place to see what decisions did we make? What thoughts did we have? And so they were like, no to that. So I said, okay. And then I think a couple of weeks later, somebody had lost a document or somebody's thoughts or somebody's notes. They got lost in an email. And they were like, you know what? We should try Google Docs. We should try Google Docs. We should try Google Drive because I don't want that to ever happen. I had some great notes. They weren't included in that last round. Such and such notes were also not included in that last round because somebody sent around the, let's say the older version, and they didn't have any of my thoughts in it. They were like, let's do Google Docs. And I learned a really great lesson, which is, that sometimes exposing people to something, the value of something, the benefit of something, maybe at the time they're not interested because maybe there's some concern. Again, like they were concerned about, oh, Google Docs, it's such a new thing. I'm not used to using this. But then, again, they took away the utility. And when they had another thought to say, hey, I have a problem, which is my notes were lost. They said, hey, the solution might be this cool Google Doc thing. So I got to convince them, and that was like a frustrating journey for me because I was so impatient. I'd be like, no, we're moving on this. We ended up co-creating and building a website. It then transformed into a matching platform, right? So it started to slowly evolve in regards to like product development. And then I personally was going to leave DC. So the question for me was, what do? I built this product. There's a community that wants to keep going with it, but I'm leaving. And I don't necessarily want to head this up anymore. So I ended up leaving, but I left in a really great way. I found a techie person to replace me, somebody who was even more techie than me, an actual software developer. I convinced him to join. I said, you're going to head up everything tech. Anytime they have a conversation, you're going to answer it. But I want you to, I vetted him because I wanted to make sure he could speak non-tech as well. I wanted to make sure that they could ask him a question and he would be able to answer it and they'd understand it. So I vetted him really well. And then what I did was I was like, okay, we have this website, people are using it. We have clients, we are matching people. We have data around the people we've matched. We're continuing to refine the metrics to say like, how many of these people were matched, ended up actually getting, help before their day of court, looking at those metrics that we defined specifically for this project, right? And I was like, okay, well, if it breaks down, that's gonna suck. So what do? So I ended up doing research and found another software company that was actually building matching platforms. It was way more robust than ours. But I convinced them to say, I could convince both parties to say, hey, let's replace our tool. And if we do, we're gonna get all these other features. And I walked them through it slowly again, because I was like, I don't want them to feel like I'm forcing this on them, but this is gonna at least be a platform that they can manage. They have this tech lead as well if they need extra stuff, but that they felt comfortable that they can manage. And it still exists today. And I no longer have to do any changes to it or any what I didn't mention here was that I learned to baby code. So I was doing like front end changes, right? So like changing things like visually. And I was like, I don't want that work anymore. So we need something that's like, the front end is completely taken care of and the back end is also completely taken care of, right? So I don't have to do anything. And it still exists today. I had left my job as a lawyer and was now working, well, I wasn't a lawyer yet. This was like people who go to law school, they have to like take something called the bar exam to become a lawyer. So I was in that space. I hadn't become a bar attorney, and so I needed more time to study. So I ended up leaving my job and started working part-time at a up-and-coming startup called Fiscal Note. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this while I study for this exam so I can become a real attorney. And Fiscal Note at the time was about, I wanna say 50 people, a venture-backed startup. They hired me because I knew laws and regulations, and they were building a product that was going to be able to, well, a SaaS product, so a software, that was going to allow companies, nonprofits, organizations, anyone to be able to search laws all across the world. And so they hadn't launched into international spaces yet. They didn't know how to find regulations and laws within India. They didn't know how to understand the different laws of the European Union. And so I was brought on to be the person who could help their engineers basically code everything properly, understand it actually, so they didn't potentially mark something as a different, mark it as a different thing than it was, and actually understand the process it takes for laws and regulations to happen in different countries. And so I sat between the product team and basically their engineering team. And so they had like 15 engineers and like 6 product leads. And we would talk every day, go through and look at mock-ups. So it was my first time actually learning. Before I didn't have like any experience in doing mock-ups. So this is where I got my like mock-ups and like web kind of like, and QA experience. So they, in addition to like, okay, they're building out, these bots and trackers, right? So they go and scrape the web, bring that data into their platform, and then they want to have me look at it to see, does it actually work? Does it actually make sense? Is everything they visually displayed accurate before they sent it to the client? Because these are paid clients, right? So it needs to be good before, think of random big nonprofit or random big company like Coca-Cola, before Coca-Cola sees it. And so I do something called quality assurance, where I go through and like make sure it looks good before it went live on the actual site. And so this, again, just deepened my interest in startups. At the time, again, this was like a 50-person company. It's now 300 people, and they just went public on the stock market maybe last week. But I got to learn so much, not only from being around the different teams of a company. And that's one thing that I would say was valuable too, because sometimes if you're on your own division, you don't understand the skill sets of all those other different players, and they all are important. At the time, there's like a businessy talk as well, where they'll say companies, whether they're nonprofits or for-profits, have different varieties. Sometimes they're product-led, which means that the product is actually what is the most important thing at the business at the time. And so that means you might have more people who are, your staff might be bigger in the product area, because that's really what's the sell. Other teams or companies at different stages might be more sales focused, where they have a huge sales team, because that's the goal, which is like, they're not really saying, oh, this product is going to sell on its own. They're really saying the sales team is going to make sure that everything people need is here, and that they believe it's going to help them. And so they have a bigger sales team. Maybe their engineering team is way smaller, but their sales team is really big. And so companies like, switch in and out of that. But it was nice to see that from the inside. And the other thing that was nice was, because it was only 30 people, I got to have a lot of interaction with the founders. And as a result, started to gain and learn lessons about managing and founding a company. So that leads me to my journey now. And I'll talk about FinEQUITY more in depth. So I'll go over. So we're going to switch the topic, because now I'm going to go heavily into social enterprise, heavily into, I would say we're a low tech solution, and I'll talk about that, and heavily into like actually fundraising. Any questions before I jump the journey into that? No? Okay. So I don't know if any of you all were there earlier. There was another presenter named Jamie Jin from Wiggle Room. So interestingly enough, we were born out of the same organization that founded Wiggle Room. I had returned back to New York, was working for the governor's office of New York State, and was again like, I think I was trying to convince them to digitize their paper documents because they have, well, this is not really public, but they have tons of rooms with tons of documents, and I was like, that's horrible. It's also creating all these inefficiencies. So during my tenure at the governor's office, I was trying to lead like a digitization project. That didn't happen. So I was like, I am so, tired of government. I want to go back into entrepreneurial spaces, and I want to specifically focus on social enterprises, like things that are really, again, focused on the things I care about. And so I ended up the Robin Hood Foundation. It's an NGO or nonprofit, a foundation in New York City. Foundation is basically a gigantic entity that really is about distributing money to nonprofits or social enterprises towards some particular outcome. So Robinhood, for example, which is not connected to the Robinhood app at all. So that's like an investment app. That's over here. And then you have Robinhood, which goes back to, like, if you know the tales of Robinhood, the idea to give to those who need. The only connection to them is that the Robinhood Foundation was founded by people who made all their money on the stock market. And so they took billions of dollars and put it towards this foundation and said, for New York City, we want to be able to say, you're going to delve out millions of dollars each year to help decrease poverty in New York City. And they are a huge organization, and they focus on the nonprofits who are the most impactful. They want to see metrics, they want to see outcomes, all those things. So they don't really focus on startups. Only 5% of what they do is focused on startups, and that is through an incubation lab called Blue Ridge Labs, which is where Wigorg came out of. Blue Ridge Labs is a rarity because there are tons of incubators. And so if you're interested in where you search for incubators, you can ask me about that too. There are tons of incubators, and these are spaces where either they're saying for free, sometimes they don't give you money, sometimes they'll say, join this incubator and we'll help you with mentors and guidance and access to other companies. And they'll say, by the end of it, we want you to have an idea, right? So the idea is it's incubating new ideas. Some of them actually give money, where they'll say, join this, apply to this, and we'll give you 10,000, we'll give you 20,000, we'll give you 50,000. And they can get kind of competitive. And most of them are focused on anything. If you don't want to do anything related to social enterprise, like that's fine too. The incubators are all different. Most of them are in the for-profit space, right? There's a small amount of them that are in the social enterprise space, and Blue Ridge Labs is one of them, one of the rare ones. And they have a specific approach. They like to focus on human-centered design. So you don't show up with an idea, because that's potentially the idea that you thought was a good solution, right? They say, we're going to use the human-centered design method, where you're showing up to go on a journey about finding the problem and then finding the solution. And the idea is that you would find a problem and the solution with community members who are directly impacted by it. So you'll come out with maybe potential clients, right? Because you've already been in conversation with different groups and different people. But you also are thinking about the problem not from a market size perspective, right? You're not saying, oh, wow, this could make a lot of money. You're saying these people have this problem and they think it's their priority problem. So it's a different approach to creating innovation. Other incubators would focus on the market sizing, or they focus on, when I was at Stanford, a lot of the engineering tools they would build a product, but they didn't know who the actual product was for. So they were like, we could do this, it's technically possible, so we're gonna build it. But when you said, well, who's this for? They say it's probably for X, but they didn't really know. And they had never talked to those people. They were like, this is probably gonna be great for scientists. So a lot of things got built, and then they had to be shelved because they didn't actually have a person who was gonna use it. So I love the approach where it's like, actually, let's start with the person. Let's not start with the solution, and let's not start with the technology. You can talk about the technology and all that stuff later. So I love that approach, and that's where FinEQUITY spun out. We were doing focus groups, tons of focus groups. We would do, if you're familiar with user-centered design, they do a lot of focus groups where they tag people's different needs. They look for themes. They think about what is really motivating people and try to come up with some kind of solution that you can also test, but all before building. So you might say, hey, we're thinking about this idea. Let's go have a session with these people where we're going to really just on a paper, or maybe we build mock-ups and we're going to say, let's talk about this solution. We want to see, is this something that we should move forward with before we build anything? Because why waste the developer's time? Why waste the money? Why waste all that for something that's not validated? I love that approach. And so we were able to do that, but ours was harder because we ended up at a problem that is actually a very complicated solution to solve. So that's why I'm going to talk about FinEQUITY. We were interviewing people and we're running into issues, which is that all the people I was on the team with were really interested in the criminal justice system. We believe that, the United States has a mass incarceration problem, that it's also a racial problem and an economic problem, and that many people go into the system, but they also come out, and they come out with, oh, my overtime. Oh, okay. They also come out with issues related to housing, all this stuff, employment, all these things that we all kind of knew. So we want to ask, well, what's a problem that people are actually experiencing that nobody's really addressing? And we ran into this issue, which is that there are people who are trying to access housing, but they kept on running into a credit check issue. And it turns out that problem was not a new problem, because actually, if it actually happens a lot in populations that are new Americans. For people who come to a new country, maybe they had credit in their country, but in the United States, that credit is not seen as valuable. So there potentially would also fail a credit check, right? But for a lot of these community members, it was knocking them away from housing. It was knocking them away from potentially even signing up for affordable health insurance, because you have to have, the federal government looks at your credit information to figure out who you are. It's a weird process. But if you don't have credit information, then they can't confirm your identity. This was the case for employment. They were going through credit checks for employment, or just like an internet plan. An internet plan also runs a credit check on you. And so if you ever get charged extra money on a utilities plan or internet plan, it's because they think that you are too risky to get that internet plan, and they'll charge you extra. So you either pay that or you walk away. So we want to focus on this, but the scary thing is that none of us had a background in finance and didn't know how complicated these, financial systems are. But we ended up saying we were going to go down to it and ended up becoming what's called still a nonprofit, but we entered the Fintech Space. The Fintech Space being a larger space of tech innovation where people were building products that can help people towards financial outcomes. And we were like, okay, we're going to focus on light tech, but solutions that would help people get a financial outcome. And we ended up fundraising off one specific product, which was that we wanted to provide people with a microloan that would help them establish credit by allowing them to continually be able to pay this loan back and have it reported as positive history so that they could gain credit. And that we would then intersperse that with financial literacy that was very niche focused and focused on their actual journey. And so we ended up basically finding a bunch of funders, raised almost $1 million to support this vision, and found partners to also help us distribute it. And so, yeah, it's in its baby phase, but it's been a great journey. I will stop there because I ran out of time. Do you guys have any questions that I can answer? Okay.
I'm going to hop in here really quickly.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you so much. It's a wonderful talk. Yes, huge round of applause. Woo!